Hey everybody, as you know, I'm super interested in prompt engineering. And if you haven't gotten into prompt engineering yet, I'm telling you what, it is the skill of the future. AI is one of these things that you need to interface it utilizing prompt engineering. Yeah, you can just talk to it in English and you can get pretty far with that. But there's a whole bunch of little tricks that you can use when you talk to it in order to get more out of it. So here's this paper. This paper was published a little bit ago by Jules White, Kuchen Fu, and a bunch of other really smart people. A prompt pattern catalog to enhance prompt engineering with ChatGPT. And instead of just like reading this to you or reviewing highlights, what I'm going to do is I've actually created a podcast style interview audio through Google Notebook LM, and it's 16 minutes long. Pretty interesting, and so you don't even have to watch this episode. You can just listen to it if you want. So sit back and relax, listen to these tips, and if you're way into prompt engineering, you probably used some of them before, like I have, but a few things were new, or at least there was new nuance there for me. So I hope this is valuable for you. I hope you enjoy.
Hey there, ready to dive deep? Today, we're tackling prompt engineering. It's
Yeah.
like if large language models like ChatGPT are this powerful engine,
Yeah.
prompt engineering is how you steer to get what you need.
It's not just about asking questions anymore. We're
Yeah.
going way beyond that. We're using these clever techniques to make these models do exactly what we want them to.
And lucky for us,
Yeah,
we have a treasure map
we do.
in the form of this research paper by White et al.
It's a good one.
From Vanderbilt University. They actually created a catalog of these techniques called prompt patterns.
Yeah, these are like blueprints for getting the most out of large language models.
Okay, so imagine I'm staring at ChatGPT. What's the first pattern? Like, what should I try out?
If you're tired of that copy-paste game, the output automator is a must-try.
Okay.
So let's say you ask the model to generate some code that involves creating multiple files.
Right.
Instead of manually copying and pasting code into each file, the output automator will generate a script that does it all for you.
Wait, so it's like the model is writing its own little helper program to execute the suggestions?
Exactly.
Wow.
Imagine asking it to modify a configuration file.
Okay.
The output automator pattern would include something like, whenever you generate code that spans more than one file, generate a Python script that can be run to automatically create the specified files or make changes to existing files to insert the generated code.
Yeah.
This is a game changer for anyone tired of tedious copy pasting, especially when dealing with complex code generation.
That's seriously cool.
Yeah.
I'm already seeing how much time that could save.
Oh, yeah.
But with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Always.
I mean, I wouldn't just run any random script without understanding it.
You're absolutely right. You still need to be careful and understand what that script is doing before you run it.
Yeah.
Think of it as a helpful assistant, but you still need to supervise them.
Got it. Always double check. So what if I'm worried about the accuracy? Like, what if it's making things up?
That's a valid concern. That's where the fact checklist pattern comes in.
Okay.
It forces the model to generate a list of all the facts it used in its answer, which you can then double check for accuracy.
Yeah.
It's like the model is providing its sources,
Okay.
highlighting the key points that you should verify.
That makes me feel a lot better. So I'm not just taking its word for it. I can actually see where it's getting this information.
Yeah.
What happens when the model just refuses to answer a question? Does that happen?
Oh, it definitely happens.
Okay.
And it can be frustrating when you hit that wall, but don't worry, the refusal breaker pattern can help.
Okay, tell me more. How does it break through those refusals?
It's not about forcing the model to answer.
Right.
It's about encouraging it to explain why it can't answer,
Okay.
and then offering alternative wordings that might be acceptable.
Yeah.
It's like a negotiation, trying to understand the model's boundaries and finding a way to ask within those boundaries.
That's a clever approach. But I can see how this could be misused. Like trying to trick the model into doing something harmful.
Yeah,
Right.
you're right to be cautious. It's important to use these patterns responsibly.
Speaking of responsibility, there's a pattern that really caught my eye.
Oh, yeah.
Meta-language creation. What's that all about?
Imagine you're working on a project that uses a lot of specialized terminology. With the meta-language creation pattern, you can create custom shorthand
Okay.
or notations to communicate more efficiently with the model. It's like teaching it a new language.
So instead of spelling everything out, I can create shortcuts that the model understands.
Exactly. For example, let's say you work with data that often involves relationships between people.
Okay.
You could tell the model, from now on, A, B means A is the parent of B. This makes your prompts shorter and easier to manage, and it helps the model understand your intentions more accurately.
Right.
Just make sure your notations are clear and don't confuse the model.
I can see how that would be incredibly useful, especially when dealing with complex concepts.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these patterns can be really powerful. Is there one that's especially practical for everyday use?
One that you'll probably use a lot is the flipped interaction pattern. This is where you turn the tables
Okay.
and let the model drive the conversation.
Oh,
It starts asking you questions, like a quiz or guiding you through a task.
okay, that's a total mind shift.
It is.
Why would I want the model to start grilling me with questions?
Think about it this way. Sometimes the model needs specific information from you to complete a task.
Yeah.
Instead of you trying to figure out what it needs, let it ask you directly.
Okay.
It's like having a super efficient assistant that knows exactly what to ask to get the job done.
So it's like the model is interviewing me to gather the information it needs. Give me a real-world example of how this would work. Let's say you want the model to write a script to deploy your web application to a server. There are a lot of specific details it needs to know. The server address, your login credentials, the location of your code, and so on. With the flipped interaction pattern, your prompt would be something like, from now on, I would like you to ask me questions to deploy a Python application to AWS. When you have enough information, create a Python script to automate the deployment. The model will then proceed to ask you all the necessary questions to get the job done.
That is seriously mind-blowing. It's like the model becomes this proactive helper
Right.
that knows exactly what information it needs to get the job done. It's almost like it's thinking for itself.
Well, it's not quite thinking for itself in the way we do, but it is becoming much more interactive and adaptable to our needs. And that's what makes these patterns so exciting. They're helping us unlock a whole new level of control and creativity with these language models.
Okay, so we've talked about automating outputs, fact-checking, breaking through refusals, creating custom languages, and even flipping the script on the conversation. What else can we do with these prompt patterns?
Oh, we're just getting started. There are patterns that can influence the style and perspective of the model's responses.
wow.
Patterns that can generate visualizations, patterns for playing games.
Really?
The list goes on.
Wait, visualizations? I thought language models only worked with text. How can they generate images or diagrams?
That's right, they primarily work with text.
Right.
But with the visualization generator pattern,
Okay.
you can craft prompts that generate output that can be used by other tools to create images or diagrams.
Oh,
It's like a relay race.
okay.
The language model generates the data and then passes it on to another tool, like GraphViz or DALL-E, to create the visual.
So I could ask a language model to create a diagram of a network topology, or even generate a piece of art using something like DALL-E.
Precisely. For example, you could prompt the model to generate a GraphViz DOT language description of a computer network with 5 nodes and the following connections, and then list the connections you want. Then you feed that output into GraphViz, and it will create a visual representation of your network.
This is blowing my mind. It's like we're not just limited to text anymore, we can actually use language models to create visual content.
It really expands the possibilities of what we can do with these models. And remember, these patterns are just starting points. You can combine and customize them to create even more powerful and sophisticated interactions.
So we're not just learning a secret language, we're learning how to compose symphonies with it.
That's a great analogy. But before we get carried away with composing our AI masterpieces, let's break down some more of these fascinating prompt patterns.
I'm ready when you are.
Let's go. Let's talk about the persona trick. It's one of the simplest yet most effective ways to get drastically different outputs from the model.
Okay, persona. It sounds like I'm asking the model to roleplay.
Exactly. You assign it a specific persona like security expert,
Right.
poet, or even Linux terminal. This changes how the model responds, mimicking the style and tone of that persona.
So if I tell it to act like a security expert, it will start analyzing code for vulnerabilities instead of just explaining what it does.
You got it. It's almost like you're channeling a different expert with each persona you choose.
Okay, so persona is about putting the model into a specific mindset. What if I need to make sure the output follows a very specific structure?
Ah, that's where the template pattern comes in. You give the model a blueprint, like a JSON structure with placeholders for specific data.
Okay,
The model then generates content that fits perfectly into those slots.
so it's like I'm saying, here's the mold, now fill it. When would I use this?
Imagine you're working with an API that requires data in a very specific format.
Right.
The template pattern ensures the model's output is structured correctly, saving you from tedious formatting and potential errors.
That sounds like a lifesaver, especially when dealing with those finicky APIs. But what about those times when I need to understand the why behind the model's answer, not just the what?
That's where the reflection pattern shines. It's like asking the model to introspect and explain its reasoning.
Okay.
You get insights into its decision-making process, which builds trust and helps you catch potential biases.
So it's not just about getting an answer, it's about understanding the logic behind it. I could see this being crucial for things like business decisions or anything with ethical implications.
Exactly. You want to know why the model recommends a certain course of action, not just blindly follow its suggestions.
This is reminding me of those times when explaining something to someone else helps me understand it better.
That's a great analogy. By forcing the model to articulate its reasoning, you often gain a deeper understanding of the topic yourself.
Okay, reflection helps me understand the model's thinking. But what about when I get an answer that I'm not quite sure is correct? Or I need more information to fully grasp it?
The cognitive verifier pattern comes in handy there. It prompts the model to break down your question into smaller, more focused questions. It's like getting the model to double-check itself.
So it's like saying, hold on, let's break this down to make sure we're both on the same page.
Yes, and by answering these sub-questions, you're not only guiding the model toward a more accurate answer,
Okay.
but also gaining a deeper understanding yourself.
So it's like a win-win. I'm getting a better answer, and I'm learning more along the way. Now, what if I have a specific goal in mind, but I'm not sure the best way to achieve it?
In that case, the alternative approaches pattern can be incredibly helpful. It's like having a brainstorming partner who can access a vast database of knowledge.
So instead of just giving me one solution, it would suggest multiple ways to tackle the problem.
Precisely. And it could even compare and contrast the pros and cons of each approach, helping you make an informed decision.
That's incredibly valuable, especially when I'm working in a field where things are constantly changing. Okay, I'm feeling a bit more confident in my prompt engineering skills now. But is there a pattern that's more about setting the ground rules for the conversation?
Absolutely. The context manager pattern is all about establishing boundaries and guiding the conversation.
So it's like I'm giving the model a set of instructions, like only consider information from these specific sources, or don't focus on formatting or style.
Exactly. You're setting the scope of the conversation, what should be considered and what should be ignored. It keeps the interaction focused and relevant to your needs.
This seems especially important when working with these models in a team setting.
You're right. It ensures everyone is on the same page and the model is operating within agreed upon parameters. It's like having a shared understanding of how the conversation should flow.
Okay, so we've got patterns for understanding, guiding, brainstorming, and even controlling the conversation. What else is there?
There's still more. Remember how we talked about generating visualizations earlier? We can take that a step further and use the model to create instructions for a whole sequence of actions.
Okay, you've got me intrigued. Tell me more. So we've got patterns for creating visualizations, but you're talking about generating instructions for a whole sequence of actions. What kind of actions are we talking about?
Think of it like a recipe, but instead of baking a cake, you're accomplishing a task or solving a problem.
Okay.
This is the recipe pattern.
Okay, so it's a step-by-step guide generated by the model. When would I use this?
Imagine you're trying to set up a new server or troubleshoot a technical problem.
Okay.
You know the general steps involved, but you might be missing some or unsure about the order. The recipe pattern can help you fill in the gaps and create a comprehensive list of instructions.
That would be incredibly useful for complex tasks or when working with unfamiliar technologies. It's like having a personalized instruction manual generated on the fly.
Exactly. It takes the guesswork out of figuring out what to do next and ensures you don't miss any crucial steps.
So, recipe is about generating instructions. What about when I need to generate a lot of creative output, like variations on a theme?
Ah, you're remembering the infinite generation pattern we touched on earlier. It's all about setting up a loop for creative output.
Okay.
The model keeps generating content based on your initial prompt until you tell it to stop.
So if I want to come up with different slogans for a product, I could just set the parameters and let the model churn them out.
You got it. And you can even refine the process by giving the model additional input between each generation's cycle.
That means I could say something like, now focus on sustainability, and the next batch of slogans would incorporate that element.
Exactly. It's like having a brainstorming partner who can instantly adapt to your suggestions. But remember, with infinite generation, you need to keep an eye on the output to make sure it stays on track.
It's like those infinite scroll features on websites. At first, it's exciting to see more and more content, but you have to be selective and curate what you're consuming.
That's a great analogy. Now, we've talked about serious applications, but we can also use these patterns for something a bit more fun, games.
Okay, I've been waiting for this. Tell me more about the gameplay pattern. It sounds like we're not just using the model as a tool, but as a playmate.
That's a fun way to think about it. The gameplay pattern leverages the model's ability to generate dynamic content to create interactive experiences.
Right.
You set the basic rules, and the model generates scenarios, challenges, and responses.
You mentioned a cybersecurity game earlier. Can you remind me how that works?
You ask the model to pretend it's a hacked Linux terminal.
Okay.
You then try to figure out what the attacker did and fix the problem by typing in commands. The model responds as if it were the compromised terminal, making for a really engaging and educational experience.
That is so cool. I'm already thinking about all the different kinds of games I could create, from educational quizzes to mystery adventures.
The possibilities are endless, and the best part is, these patterns are just the starting point. As we experiment and combine them, who knows what new and exciting applications we'll discover.
It's like we're not just learning a language. We're learning a whole new way of thinking and creating. It's inspiring.
I completely agree. It's an exciting time to be exploring this frontier.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive.
Sounds good.
So, what's the key takeaway for our listeners today? What should they do right now after listening to this episode?
Don't just listen to this and forget about it. Go out and experiment with these patterns. Pick one that sounds interesting and try applying it to a real-world problem. You'll be amazed at what you can accomplish.
It's all about shifting our mindset from seeing these models as passive tools to recognizing them as dynamic partners in a creative process. And as these models continue to evolve, who knows what new patterns and possibilities will emerge?
It's truly a fascinating field.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey into the world of prompt engineering. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep prompting those models to do amazing things.